It is military power that ultimately lies at the heart of state power. PLA has undergone perhaps the most massive military modernization in the history of mankind. Z is constantly challenging the PLA to exceed the capacity of the American military in these dwindling timelines.
Namaskar and Jai Hind. Welcome to Samvad, your go-to channel for geopolitics and national security. And we are discussing China and trying to understand what it is up to. And we have with us Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, former GoC-In Chief of the Chief Army Training Command of the Indian Army and presently member of the Union Public Service Commission. Welcome to Samvad, sir.
Thank you, Mayank. Great pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
So to start off with, it was expected that the American and Chinese conflict could be around the 2049 by the time the Chinese leaders have promised their nation promising the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and a world-class military, or say 2035 when they would have a world-class military, or even 2027 when experts say that they would have the wherewithal to invade China. But the recent rhetoric and the war drumbeats coming out of China seem to suggest that Xi Jinping has suddenly changed plans. So what is your assessment?
All right. So let me just put few facts before you, and then we will decide collectively as to what these timelines are. So, President Xi, like Chairman Mao, in my view, is a strategic realist. When it comes to the power calculus and the role of the instrument of force within that power calculus, their views are rather unique. So to paraphrase President Xi, he says, as important as economic prosperity is, it is military power that ultimately lies at the heart of state power. Now, look at this nuanced difference which President Xi is making. Something similar to what Mao said decades ago when he said that political power flows from the barrel of a gun, or something like that. So their views are identical. Now, if they were merely views, things would have been fine. But the PLA, in my view, has been nursed with care and resourced well over the last 2 to 3 decades. As a result, it has grown 44-fold in various metrics in 1995 to include what we know a sharp digital makeover. Sharp digital makeover. There are others who say that the PLA has undergone perhaps the most massive military modernization in the history of mankind. That's the point number 2. This sharp digital makeover, amongst other things, there are 2 signature projects. It's long-range precision strikes and its strategic support force, which is all about capturing the information spectrum and fusing space, cyber, and EW. And they are just not cliches. If you go into the detailed metrics, the outcomes are very consequential. They are deep. So the PLA makeover is deep. The American military's professional assessment of the PLA itself, American military, they say it is a peer competitor in East Asia. They're already acknowledging it, which means that it is an equal in forces, weaponry, and organizational sophistication. So not just numbers, in the manner in which they operate, their doctrines, and is a long-term strategic competitor around the world. So at least in the Western Pacific and in the Taiwan Strait specifically, the PLA seems to have a combat edge. And it is not only that, what you brought about timelines, Z is constantly challenging the PLA to exceed the capacity of the American military in these dwindling timelines. So 2035, 2030, and as he sees progress, 2027. There is a capacity blitzkrieg, both along the Eastern Theater Command as also the Western Theater Command. And what is the game plan? The game plan, in my view, is not really to use force if it is not required, because China is not an irrational power. It will not. Why should it spoil its economic party by just going to war? But the objectives are most sophisticated. So create such a huge strategic military differential that the adversary sees reason and seeks political terms to avoid conflict. So all this is very nuanced. I'm not saying that they're itching to go to war, but they are definitely creating this capacity differential. They are taking precise countermeasures, for example, to neutralize America's power projection capacity. So they've studied them for years. 2004 or something, the chairman of the Chinese NDU said, we have translated every word that Andrew Marshall wrote. So let me give you an assessment. They see that, the power projection is based on their American satellite system, therefore the ASAT capability. And now ASAT is not only a capability, I'm told this year it is being inducted into their operational inventory. And that whole A2AD network. On YouTube, I think 3 months back, Admiral Aquilino, the CNC of the IPACOM, and their Assistant Secretary of Defense, Ratna, are being grilled by the US Armed Forces Committee. You just watch that. You will see worry on the faces of Admiral Aquilino and Ratna. It's not that the American military is not taking steps. The American military is taking steps in terms of distributed deployment, resilience, better missile defense, THAAD, forward presence, submarines, marine forces, a deep reorganization in the marine force, interoperability, interdependence with allies, in Guam, Japan, Philippines, all this. But still, on balance, in the Western Pacific and in the Taiwan Strait, PLA has the military edge. So it seems. In many war games that have been conducted in the Taiwan Strait, by American acknowledgement, the PLA will win. Now, having said all this, they're in conflict and war, there are a whole lot of imponderables. So a lot could still go wrong. But pure in capacity terms, there is not a military force which has rivaled the Americans so seriously in recent decades. And that is my short point. Now, whether or not they come to a military head is, of course, a function of a host of variables, as you know better than me. The broader sway of international relations, domestic politics. So I'm not saying that they are coming to a military head in any timeline. I'm just saying that if push comes to shove, the PLA has the capacity to execute military plans in a far earlier time frame than we ever thought. And you yourself alluded, to those timelines. So I basically put forth the relative combat equations, the relative combat postures, and my conclusion is that in the Taiwan Strait, in the Western Pacific, the PLA has an advantage, which it didn't have many years back. Look at that. PLA was a predominantly land force. Today, it's going to get 460 ships by 2030. It's going to exceed the US Navy. Now, these are dramatic changes. And we must just give the adversary credit for that. Does that mean that they are 12 feet tall? I'm not saying it. When we come to the later questions, certainly not. But we must acknowledge that this is a deep, sophisticated makeover. Can it be handled? Of course. And how? We'll discuss in subsequent questions.
So the economic makeover of China is as dazzling as the military makeover. I mean, they are supposed to be having 24% of the global GDP by 2035. But the other side, the flip side of the story is that they have a slowdown in economy because of COVID and other factors. Then the aging population, where the demography is not giving them an opportunity, might not give them an opportunity to actually execute their military and economic plans. So maybe Xi Jinping is seeing a closing down of the window of opportunity. Or perhaps because, history tells us that most of these authoritarian dictators, they act irrationally at times. So my question is, does Xi Jinping see a closing of this window of opportunity? And therefore, this basically the aggressive stance he's being taking around in world affairs?
Okay, see, without doubt, the Chinese economy is in deep trouble. So to add to what you have said, there is the zero COVID policy. I mean, initially, much of the world thought that they had handled the pandemic very well. But the fact they don't have a vaccine, and India, by the way, produced a vaccine in 12 months, which is a huge, something we have to be really proud of. They are still struggling with the vaccine. And consequently, the zero COVID policy, the real estate crisis, bad demographics. I mean, somebody was telling me that by the end of the century, the Chinese will be half of their population. I mean, that's really phenomenal. But there are others who say that many of these demographic predictions have gone wrong in the past. So there are all kinds of, possibility. Also, as I said, China is not an irrational power. It will not rush headlong into conflict if its economy continues to crumble. It will choose its moment very carefully because it cannot afford to take a misstep. I mean, Xi, if he resorts to a military option in Taiwan and it doesn't go right, I think that will be the end of his career. So it's a huge step. Yet, let's also look at some of the contrarian views. There are those who suggest that, of course, the Chinese economy is in trouble, but it has enough depth and sophistication to induce corrections to ward off these challenges. There's no time to go into this. But I would suggest a book to you by Thomas Orlick, which says its heading is The Bubble That Never Pops, meaning that while many assertions of doom and gloom in the Chinese economy of the past have not come true because of this, these deep-seated ability to administer corrections. Also, what must be understood that some part of the slowing economy is a consequence of conscious decisions. Xi and his cohorts, they look at the issue like this. They say, when all these business magnates like Jack Ma and all of them were becoming larger than life characters, when they threatened the party, ideology is always above these business tycoons. The big lesson from the downfall of the Soviet. And so they struck back. So it is a conscious decision. And the common prosperity agenda. I mean, there is one view that, it has led to its doom. The other view is that they are careful of the inequality quotient. So these are all conscious decisions. Yes, some of the steps they have taken to kill the animal spirits of, business, enterprise and all is of course not wise. But they are conscious decisions, by which I mean, and now in the build-up to the Congress, the 20th Party Congress, you find a lot of corrections being made to the economy. So, I mean, that's one point about the economy. But also see another thing. In per capita terms, the Chinese are not even 1/4 of the American economy. But per capita is a measure of economic development, economic indices. But what gets you the aircraft carriers and the military wherewithal is total GDP, where in PPP terms they already exceed. So the military capability is coming from an entirely different, source. But there are equal worries in the American economy. Aren't they hit by inflation? Badly hit by inflation, the budgetary profligacy and so on. So my point is that economics alone cannot determine whether or not, a country will go to war. They could be entirely different set of reasons. And if not war, even the struggle for strategic military ascendancy. And what is worse in America and what is not there in China is deep domestic divide. So just, hypothetically, 2024, if Trump returns, and there is again that civil disorder which we saw in 2019, and you provide a moment of distraction to the world, will China be tempted to do something? It could. So these are all conjectures. I do not rule out what you're saying about the economy and all, but for a country of China's size, it can absorb these downward spirals a bit and come back into or resuscitate at a later date. So all these things are speculative. Yet there are possibilities. But we should not merely tie it down to economic downturns. I mean, there are many examples in history when countries have invested in their military when they were not economic powers. Look at Britain investing in the navies in a century much before it became a power. It invested in its navy and then became a power. So there are all kinds of possibilities. All I'm saying is that since it is our northern adversary, we should be conscious of these factors. What you are saying is right, but for all the reasons that I've stated, mere economic downturns may not be an impediment in its assertion, in Chinese assertiveness. It is much more sophisticated, all these issues, than some of these debates, superficial debates, tend to bring up. That's my view.
So not very long ago, some US president spoke of China, more danger from a weak China rather than from a strong one. And after this Russia-Ukraine conflict also, the Chinese are being considered as a challenge, and Russia has come back to being the main adversary. Do you perceive a kind of a difference, return to the sphere of influence theory during the Cold Wars, when the Soviets had their spheres of influence and the US had and NATO had their spheres of influence, to the 21st century and China and US basically reconciling to their spheres of influence?
Okay, see, before I come to that, I just want to make a quick point to put this growing assertiveness of China in context. There is a view amongst the Chinese elite, and a part of the elite, there are others who hold another view, that China has had enough of economic growth, enough of wealth. Now the time has come to convert that wealth into power. And how do you convert that wealth into power? To get back what you think is legitimately yours. You think, the Chinese think, Taiwan, and all these issues come up. And they also argue that hide and bite cannot be a dictum in perpetuity. So hide and bite kar liya, uska fayda utha liya. And there is a phrase now, which I heard Prime Minister Kevin Rudd using. He says China is going loud and proud, and deliberately loud and proud. And they reason it like this, कि भाई सब कुछ ठीक चल रहा है. Mao gave us revolution, he gave us self-respect, Deng gave us wealth, Xi will now restore us to our greatness. And look at how he is preparing the PLA. He tells the PLA, or when they discuss it, they say that if we get into a military option, there must be 1,000% assuredness. 1,000% assuredness for military options. And he's challenging them. He says, you haven't fought a war since 1949, he tells their Navy. He tells the PLA ground forces, that 79 mein you were routed by the Vietnamese. So wake up. That's the way he's propping them. And also look at the Chinese worldview. I'm not defending it. I'm just giving you the Chinese worldview. They say America today has 43 military bases. From each base, you send out 2 ships to within 12 nautical miles of Chinese territory. They say, is this military coercion or is this freedom of navigation? And they say all these rules were created when we were not part of the power system. Now we are part of the power system. We want to renegotiate all these rules. And therefore they believe, for example, they say Hong Kong was captured in the century of humiliation when they were weak. So should we get it back? They therefore want to push the Americans out of their maritime periphery. It's not my view. I don't agree with it, but this is the Chinese view. When you listen to them. And many people in countries like Singapore, Australia, and closer to the Chinese, they agree with this view. They don't want to be on either China's side or on the US side. So much of this resurgence, that the point I make, may not resonate with you and me, but this Chinese dream which has been sold in this manner, that, keep your freedoms low for a while, we'll make you powerful, we'll give you the technological lead, we'll make you a military power, and then we will see what the freedoms are. Now, to some of the Chinese, this sells. By the way, the Chinese always argue, we do not agree with them, that today what we call authoritarian systems, they say it is better, it has got more people out of poverty. It delivers. Democracies are not delivering. Many of the people in Africa are buying this view. Many of the people. So this lies, at the base of all this. One other phrase you'll hear which says, great changes not seen in centuries. He is fond of using this phrase. It has a historical basis. They say in 1872, there was a general called Li Hongzhang. He was the Chinese Bismarck who was uniting all of China. He warned them. He warned the Chinese about Japanese Western predations, about a technology sweep. He was not listened to. China did not make use of that opportunity, and therefore it went into this, century of humiliation. Xi is repurposing that phrase to say that we are in a similar moment. America is in decline. There are these huge technology areas. You ask the Americans, they'll tell you that but for semiconductors in most of the key technologies of the future, blockchain, quantum, AI, this, that, and the other, the Chinese are in the lead. Mm-hmm. So when they are saying, Xi says, great changes not seen in 3,000 years. Now is the time. But he has repurposed that moment of, disaster which led to the humiliation as a moment of rejuvenation. He says, now is our time, let's seize it. And this is at the basis of the, Chinese dream, and therefore you have the BRI and all that. Now, in continuation of that, they say this, that you see, if you can have a Western hemisphere of the American making, why can't we have in Eastern hemisphere of the Chinese making? What in the Chinese mood? That is their one argument. When you talk of the Cold War, see the two differences in the preceding Cold War is that at its height, the Russian economy was less than half the size of the American economy. And here I and you know by 2035, China will own 24% of the GDP and America will be 14% of the GDP. Mm-hmm. Unlike the Russians or the Soviet, who didn't have a Silicon Valley, an innovative system to back their military, and that's how it faded or it receded into oblivion. The Chinese have a very powerful technological. So this Cold War in that sense is very different. It is between two equals. And when this is the equity balance, then there is some, when they talk of their own hemisphere, there is some logic to it. But the Americans will never allow it because by pure balance of power, the Americans will not tolerate any regional hegemony, neither Russia in Europe nor China here, because the moment you do that, if you tolerate a regional hegemon, that hegemon will start roaming the globe. The Chinese are doing that. Today they have bases in Eastern Indian Ocean, Western Indian Ocean, now in the Atlantic. I told you 460 ships, a 6 aircraft carrier navy. So they have global aspirations. And therefore, this battle between two equal hemispheres, it is very difficult to say. But perhaps, the US will have to find a modus vivendi. And I think it was Bill Clinton who many years back argued, he saw this pretty early. And before that, let me say that the decline of the Americans has been predicted many times in the past. Maybe they come back and they don't allow it. That is an equal possibility with Japan and so many other countries in the past. But Bill Clinton said many years back that USA must learn how to live, not as the number one power, but as the number two power in the world. So if that becomes the reality because of the economic metrics and all, and America realizes this, then they can be a modus vivendi. And you could have these two hemispheres that you are talking of. Or, there are all kinds of possibilities. Lately, what is happening in Ukraine with the counteroffensives in Kharkiv and Kherson and, now that possibility of Mariupol opening up to Crimea, we could have a Europe-led containment of Russia, a Europe-led containment of Russia and a US-led containment of China. So there are all kinds of possibilities at this stage, very difficult to predict. So while there is every possibility that the Americans may strike back, there is the equal possibility that China may be the number one in a decade or so. So we have to live with all these kinds of possibilities.
So recently I heard American analysts talk of détente. So how serious is this possibility of détente between the Americans and the Chinese?
At the moment, I don't see any possibility of détente because there is this huge struggle to, gain a strategic ascendancy in the Indo-Pacific. Because so at the moment, I don't see it. But
yes, sir.
But you may not be wrong. Kissinger has been making hints of this kind, that ultimately you have to live in peace, find a way. I told you about Bill Clinton. So at some stage, this realization may come in because, nothing could be worse for the world order than the number one and number two powers coming to a head. It would be absolutely disastrous. In fact, the last time, power switched hands from, say, the British, from the Brits to the Americans, it was entirely peaceful. And what is also of great difference is that many times in the past, The power transition has occurred between Europeans, between Western-led democracies. Here is a totally different system which is going to replace the world order, if it does, and all kinds of possibilities are there. So, I mean, it's very difficult to say anything with surety. All I can say is that interesting times are ahead.
Between the detente and the challenges, sir, what are the options, strategic options, I would say, for India? Because it's caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. So what are the strategic options for India?
So the options for India, firstly, is, we must acknowledge the reality of the Chinese military juggernaut. It is something that having done that, so let me take you to the operational rebalancing. Today, along the LAC, as far as numbers are concerned, reserves are concerned, make, armor, logistics, all that we've taken care of. We've also sent a message to them that, listen, for any, what shall we say, adventurism, there will be costs to pay. I mean, Kailash was a good example of that if you can do it, so can we. I think the foreign minister has paraphrased it very well when he says that the state of Sino-Indian relations depends on the state of the border. Mm. So that message is extremely clear. Also, China should worry that, if because of all that is happening in Taiwan, is it in their interest to open up another front along the LAC? I mean, they may end up. So all those things are there. Atmanirbharta. Emergency powers, a whole lot of purchases have come, at the tactical operational levels in terms of loiter, drones, ISR, so on and so forth. So these are the good things. Atmanirbharta has, shall I say, let loose these forces of innovation, energy, and enterprise in our defense ecosystem. These are the good things. But we must also be absolute realists. So what should worry us? The pace and scale of infra capacity that the Chinese generate along the LAC. We have to step up the game. We can do it if we step up the game. The fact that they are transiting to AI-enabled combat, digital combat, strategic support force, long-range precision. You see now, Ukraine is as much about strategic imagination, tactical prowess, as it is about semiconductors. So this, you have to get into the semiconductor business. Otherwise, tomorrow, today, a military without semiconductor prowess is a hugely threatened military. And we have our entire dependence on Russia, which is turned dependent on the West. So these are the areas of worry. We also need to turn to the seas as this challenge is taking place along the LAC. If we are fixated to the LAC and we don't take into account the oceanic dimension, so while a lot is good, which I said, a lot needs to be done. But also, let me make one point here. Look at the budgets. Military budget of USA is roughly 3 times that of China. The Chinese military budget is 3 times that of India. So even when China doesn't equal America's defense budgets because of all the things that has done, integration, imagination, technology, innovation, restructuring, HR reform, in similar budget differentials, it is causing displacement anxiety in the Americans. General Hyten, Challen, the software boss, their resignations last year or their commentaries last year, they point to all this. So even with this budget differential, if we carry out all those reforms that I have said, we could cause displacement anxiety. So in sum, operational rebalancing is good. There are worries. A lot of smart reforms can make sure that we enhance our deterrence signatures by an order of magnitude. And therefore, the Chinese are not 12 feet tall. They are 4 feet tall. If we just do all these things that I'm talking of, we are quite capable of taking on the Chinese.
Challenging but interesting times ahead, sir. Thank you so much for your time, sir, because we have to wind up now. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to have you on Samvad very soon. Thank you so much, and Jai Hind.
Great pleasure, Mayank. Thank you so much. All the best to you and to your channel. Thank you so much.